Before we start constructing the salesperson table, let's see what the requirements are, what attributes or columns should be there in the salesperson table. If we go back to the tutorial or the lab work, we know that the salesperson table has all these fields or columns. By the way, when I refer to a field, it's the same as column, it's same as attribute. Field, column, attribute in a table, all of them mean the same thing. All right. So we have the salesperson ID field, that's an auto number. So when a new salesperson is inserted, the Microsoft Access database will give a new number on its own. So you don't have to do too much with it if you select this auto number field. And that would also serve as the primary key for this table. And then we will keep track of the salesperson's last name as text of 15 characters, first name as text of 15 characters, commission rate, what commission do they make? We would have that as an integer. So for example, if a salesperson makes 10% commission, then we would store that as 10 in this field. If they make 5% commission, we'll store it as 5, and so on and so forth. Finally, we'll also keep track of the salesperson's gender, male or female, as a text field with one character. So let's return to the Microsoft Access database, and this table 1 that you see, I want you to go here and right click on it, see where the mouse is pointing, right click on it and click on save, and I would like you to save this as salesperson table. It shows the save as, and I type the salesperson and click OK. Now you should see this being changed to salesperson here, and I would want you to save it and close it for now, and you should see the salesperson table on this left hand side menu here in Microsoft Access. Now go back to the salesperson table again, right click on it and select the design view. All right, if we can go to the design view, we can start typing in the attributes or the fields or columns that the salesperson table should have, right? So the first field is the salesperson ID. So I believe we use the sales person with proper case, sales S and P capital ID as auto number. So this is the first field, and you should see this key field here, key indicator here. This means that salesperson ID is the primary key. If you don't see this, it's very simple for you to change this into a primary key. Select this, and if you click this primary key here, it would toggle it between primary key and non-primary key. I do want it to be the primary key, so I just want you to go back and click this primary key and see this here, so that we can confirm, we can be sure that salesperson ID is the PK or primary key. All right. So the next one is the last name of the salesperson. The last name is a short text. And so if I go here, you will see short text, long text. And since I just need 15 characters, I don't need long text. I would select short text, and I will get, I will type 15 here as field size on the screen at the bottom. All right. So in other words, I typed last name here, I selected short text, and for the field size, I do select 15. Right. You can do Additional things here, you never want the salesperson's last name to be empty, so you always want to say it's required, so that when somebody is entering a new salesperson, they would be forced to enter a last name for that salesperson. The same thing I would do for first name. First name is short text, and 15 once again required for the salesperson. And the next two fields are commission rate, integer, and gender text. So I would type in commission rate here, and I would select this as number, and once I have it as number, I would select it as integer in the lower half. That gives more details about this number. All right, if I open this drop down menu, I would see byte, integer, long integer, and so on and so forth. I just need integer. That should work fairly well here. You can also go with byte for this example, but let's just stick with integer for because that's what we have in the assignment instructions. And last but not least, we'll go with the gender, and for gender we'll once again choose short text and field size of 1. I do have the salesperson table now as specified in the lab work or the tutorial assignment. Salesperson ID, auto number, last name short text 15 required yes, first name short text 15 required yes, commission rate is a number, gender is a short text, and all I have to do now is to go back here and save this. You can save it here by clicking this, or you can also right click on it and save this. And once I save this, I'm also going to close this. So I have the salesperson table kind of completely defined at this point. It has no data, so if I double click on it, you will see empty data, but at least I have all the fields defined, and I can now move on to construct the next table, which is the customer table. All right, we just constructed the salesperson table. Now we would like to move on to the customer table. So to create the customer table, let's review the requirements. The customer ID is the primary key, and it would be an auto number field in the customer table. And then we'll have the customer name and the customer city. These are text fields. Customer name will be 15 characters. Notice that in the salesperson table, we split the salesperson's name into last name and first name into two different things to hold their last name and first name, two different columns to hold a last name and first name. Whereas in the case of customers, we are not that precise. We are only going to hold the entire name of the customer for the sake of simplicity as one field in 15 characters text. Similarly, we have a customer city that is 20 characters in text, and we will also have the salesperson ID. Remember, we had the salesperson ID as the primary key in the salesperson table. Now we are also going to have this as a foreign key. This is the concept in databases, in relational databases, that is very, very crucial to relate the salesperson table with the customer table. So salesperson ID will have the same, we'll define it almost the same way as in the salesperson table. So the salesperson ID in the customer table will have a long integer, and this way we can establish the relationships between these two tables. All right, so now So without much delay, let's go back to our database. And we have the salesperson table open. I'm going to close this. And I'll say yes because it's asking me whether I want to change the layout of this table. I do want it to save this because I've changed the layout by dragging and dropping these columns so I can see all the names more clearly. So I say yes here. And now go back to the create tab at the top in this area. So once you go to the create tab, we can create a number of things on this tab by clicking on these buttons. I'm going to create a table, but I would like to use the table design. So click on this table design and you will go to this table design with field name and data type. The field name that I'm going to choose for the first one is the customer ID, and then I will move on to customer name, customer city, and so on and so forth. For to make things simpler, I would just like to eliminate spaces in what was given in the specifications. So for example, I would use customer ID without spaces between customer and ID, and this would be an auto number. And remember, this should be the primary key. As we went through salesperson table, we used the primary key. We selected this as the primary key by simply clicking on this primary key button. So that's what I want you to do. So I have the customer ID set as primary key, and then I have customer name, and that is short text and 15. I select the short text here. Just as before, I come back here and I select field size as 15, and I'll change the required to yes. Right? Then I will go to customer city and I'll get short text 20, and I will have so if you want, you can change this required, that city. If you want the customer city to be a required field, you can change this to yes. If you don't want it to be a required field, sometimes if we don't know the customer city, we could leave it as not a required field. That way we can still enter the customer name and move on to the next customer. But in this case, we are making it a little stricter. We want both the customer's name and the city, and that's why we have it as a required field here. And finally, the last field or the last column that we have is the salesperson ID. This is very similarly defined compared to the salesperson table, and we will know why when we establish the relationships. So I do want you to select the number field here and select this field size as long integer, number and long integer, and this completes all the columns or all the fields in the customer table. The only thing that's left for us is to save this table. So to save this table, I'm going to right click on this in this area and select save. When it asks me to type in a name, I'm going to select customer or type customer. Maybe I should, for the sake of just to be consistent with the salesperson table, I would use all caps, customer table, click OK, and I have I'll save this and close this, and that way I see the customer table. So now you should see, after you successfully complete this step, you should see the customer table, you should see the salesperson table in your Microsoft Access database.